Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Islam Channel's rolling news coverage of the war in Palestine and the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, with myself, Chris Banbury. Now we're joined by Mohammed Daniel, who grew up in North London and was Jewish until 1998 when he reverted to Islam. His journey to Islam began with a trip to Palestine in 1988. He's a poet who's written poems regarding Palestine. Mohammed, welcome. Mohammed?
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Alaikum salam.
Can you
Nice to meet you.
just describe your childhood? Was it a conventional Jewish childhood?
Yeah, very much so. Grew up in North London, Finchley, and not really particularly religious family. My dad is basically an atheist. My mum kind of more cultural, into Judaism. So we're part of it, but like many sort of secular Jews, there's that Jewish identity, and there's also that link to Zionism, but nothing particularly religious, not for me anyway at that time.
Were your parents Zionists? Or?
They were, but more like a lot of Jews, they were kind of Zionist by default. You know, Zionism, part of the Zionist sort of indoctrination and brainwashing is that they make it very clear that you have to support Israel no matter what. When you're in the diaspora, it's different in Israel, but in the diaspora, it's like, you know, you have to support Israel because of the Holocaust. That's it. There's no kind of rationalizing it or intellectualizing it. It's just something you have to do because never again, you know.
Now, before you went to Palestine in 1988, had you begun to question that particular mindset?
No, not at all. No, I mean, I was only 17. So I just kind of arrived there by accident. Looking back on it, I would say Qadar Allah, you know, destiny. And but I was just traveling. I wasn't, you know, very into studying and stuff at that time. And so I just traveled. I went to Greece and I worked in a sort of on beaches and in bar for a summer. And then some guys from Romford, proper geezers, said, "Do you want to come to? Do you want to come in a van?" And we're driving over to Egypt. So we went to Piraeus in Greece, took the boat to Haifa, and then their idea was to drive down to Egypt. But I sort of run out of money. So I phoned my parents and said, "I've run out of money." And they were like, "Okay, well, you haven't been in contact and you're only 17, so we'll send you some money and you can come home." And I was like, "No, I want to see the world a bit." So I ended up going to Tel Aviv without any money and got work there, and then had a very different experience really of Israel than I would have had if I'd have gone on like a sort of Jewish youth program. And I met a lot of Palestinians, and alhamdulillah, that's what started me looking into Islam, and ended up with me becoming Muslim.
And did you travel into the occupied territories at that time?
I didn't actually, no, but I did work on a farm, like a kibbutz in the south, right near Gaza, and it was the time of the first Intifada. I've written a poem about that experience. I could say the poem if you like.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. Just give me a sec. Okay. Bismillah. I went to Tel Aviv and washed dishes for some bread with Mustafa from the West Bank. I listened as he said, "We don't hate the Jews, we just want our land back. Ain't that still the problem, the reason they attack?" I took a trip to Egypt. In the desert I did stay. Sat beneath an orange tree, I heard the caller say, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. God is great, come to pray." But I didn't understand, for it was not that day. I went back to Israel, got a job near Gaza on a farm. I worked with Palestinians who never did me any harm. They treated me like a brother. Their kindness made me think. But the Israelis said, "They're dirty, don't share their food and drink." It was the time of Intifada. Gaza was rising up. Sometimes Mahmoud couldn't get back, so together we would sup on sweet potatoes and shakshuka. Then I would watch him pray. But I didn't join him, for it was not that day. Once Hassan took my hand and looked me in the eye. and recited the Shahada, gesturing I should reply and testify Allah is one and Muhammad showed the way, but I could not bear witness, for it was not that day. For 10 more years I travelled, searching for inner sight. Then Allah in His mercy guided me to the light. As I recited my Shahada, I remembered Hassan. May Allah be pleased with him. May he grow in Iman. Oh Ghazans, we are helpless. All we can do is pray. And I can only thank you for helping me to see that day.
Mohammed, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. So both your reversion to Islam and your questioning of the whole Zionist project began with that contact with Palestinians and other Muslims on that trip to the Middle East.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I can't describe really how kind they were to me. You know, I was 17. I was a bit lost at that time. And these guys, they were coming in from Gaza. At that time, it was the first Intifada. And so sometimes there was a curfew, as I said in the poem. So they were going through tough times, you know, but their kindness just touched me. And then it compared that to the harshness I was receiving from my Israeli bosses who I was working for. And it just sowed a seed of faith, I guess, in me. You know, I wasn't ready to become Muslim then. I didn't even know anything about it. But then a long journey began where I started to, in my 20s, have a real sort of identity crisis, I guess. And I started to look into my Jewish roots with a view to becoming more religious as a Jew, because I thought, I always believed in God, and I thought, okay, maybe the answer for me is religion. So let me look into my own religion that I was born into, and let me look into Zionism. And that's, at one point I was thinking maybe I need to go to Israel, you know, and do what a lot of people from my background have done, emigrate there. And, you know, there's people in the army, in the IDF, it's all over the Daily Mail, how they're doing that, which is just crazy to me, how they can say that that's their home. But anyway, so I went through that in my 20s, trying to work that out. And as I looked into it and read, because it was books at that time, like, you know, there was not, the internet was very young. I started to see that my mind got cleared of Zionism, and I saw that the reality of it. And I suppose on a heart level that had already happened to me 10 years before, because whenever people would say things like, oh, the Palestinians, the Arabs are terrorists and they're this and they're that, I'd be like, well, I've been there and they're not that. And I've met them and it's different. They're not like that. So I knew that wasn't true, but intellectually I had to read. And anybody, and I would implore anybody who wants to know about the situation to read properly, you know, read books on this, because, you know, it's not about sound bites. It's about understanding the root of the problem. And as I understood that, it cleared my mind of the Zionism. And then as I researched Judaism, it led me to Islam, because Judaism leads to Christianity, which leads to Islam. Islam is true Reformed Judaism.
I mean, that's an interesting point, because because when confronted with anti-Semitism, we have to speak out against anti-Semitism precisely because of that, in many ways. I mean, obviously we're against racism per se, but for Muslims, that point you're making is a very important one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I've never seen a situation. I mean, obviously, I've been following what's happening in Palestine for years now, and I've never seen a time when Jews have been speaking up against what's happening as much as now. Alhamdulillah. And I think it's because there are many decent Jews, you know, many of them in my family, and there are many non-Zionist Jews, and there are many non-Zionist Israelis, but they have to be very quiet at the moment. It's a very difficult time for them. It's a very difficult time even for Zionists, Israelis who just disagree with what's going on right now, because it's basically become a police state. You know, so but I think Muslims are pretty aware that there's a difference between Jews and Zionism. I see that more and more, and that's an important point. But it gets complicated by the fact that the far right Israelis are religious Zionists. So they've taken Judaism and they've perverted it, and they've made these crazy interpretations which basically talk about we're in messianic times. This is, you know, Itzhak ben Gvir and these guys, and that their narrative is very strong. This is the problem, because the secular Zionist narrative is very weak. It's got an inherent contradiction or inherent problem in that it can't be compatible with democracy, because, and I think a lot of people are seeing that now. But then where do you go with that? I think you had on Gideon Levy a little while ago, and he's very clear on that as well, and he writes very well about it, and he's a very brave man, and he talks about that and how the only real logical conclusion to peace is a one-state solution, is Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call it, but equal rights for all, which is effectively, you've got a one state at the moment, you've just got very unequal rights for all, and that needs to change. But so the secular Zionist narrative doesn't really hold up, because how do you deal with that reality unless you decontextualize it from the reality of how Israel was created, which is what people want to do. You know, they want to say, here we are, we're Israel, we've got our rights like anybody else. It's like, yeah, but you built your country on a stolen land. You know, that's the problem. Whereas the religious Zionists are very honest, and they say, yeah, we stole the land, it's ours. It's promised us by God. You know, he's a real estate agent all of a sudden. And you know what? On top of that, we're in the Messianic age where we're preparing for the Messiah to come. And before the Messiah comes, the Kabbalah says that there will be a first Messiah who prepares the way. And that guy will be like a son of Joseph, they call him. And he'll be militant, you know, and he'll prepare the way for the son of David to come, who will be the one who does miracles and stuff. Who knows who that might be, right? So they interpret that as saying that that militant son of Joseph is the state of Israel. That's how they interpret it. They say it, and he's coming riding on a donkey. So then they had the question, the rabbis had the question like, well, if he's riding on a donkey, how can it be a collective Messiah? How can a collective Messiah ride on a donkey? And then they say, well, donkey is an analogy for the state of Israel. So Netanyahu is the donkey, and it's Itzhak ben Gvir and the other guy, Shmotrich, I can't remember his name. They're riding the donkey. So they're taking the state of Israel to where they need to go, which is literally, they see it as purifying the land. They're very open about this, you know. They see killing Palestinians, either Palestinians have to be subservient or gone or dead, as far as they're concerned. And that's why it's so scary at the time. And I think people need to understand it.
I mean, you mentioned the importance of reading, and obviously you have read a lot. It's quite important that there are very important Israeli Jewish voices who are not just questioning the state of Israel, but are actually explaining. I'm thinking Ilan Pappé, for instance, talks of ethnic cleansing. You know, Gideon Levy, you mentioned, I could go through a range of others. These are actually very important voices and people who should be read to understand the situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, Ilan Pappé, Avi Shleim, Edward Said.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to know about Palestine, read Question of Palestine, Edward Said. That one book did more for me than maybe any other book, apart from the Quran, obviously. But that book is incredible. There's another, yeah, there's a few.
Sorry to interrupt, but you can actually watch one of these people on YouTube if you want. They're on there.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? It's like social media is great for raising awareness, and I think that that's why people are so aware at the moment and of what's going on. But it's sound bites, isn't it? You know, that's why I started writing poems and trying to put that out there because at least maybe people will grab people's attention. But we're all just scrolling, and it's like, you know, you and I, probably you as well as me, come from a time when we were young, when there was books. You wanted to know about something, you get a book and you read that book and you learn about that stuff, and then you get depth, you know. And that's what's needed in this debate is depth. If you want to understand, you've got to go deep, because this conflict is deep. This has nothing to do with October the 7th. This is a 100-year-old conflict.
No, I would concur. I mean, it's not my job to concur, but I would concur. I think it's very important that viewers should take the time to read people like Ilan Pappé and the other authors that you've mentioned, because it does give you a deeper understanding. And I think Edward Said, I concur. I think it's a fantastically important voice. Someone who was born in Jerusalem, had to flee to Egypt, then Lebanon and the United States. It's very, very important. It's a very moving book, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So,
and then he also wrote about colonialism, didn't he?
Yeah, Orientalism.
Orientalism. And that as well is really important, because that's what's going on here. There's lots of things going on here. There's that religious Zionism, but it's kind of colluding with, the economic stuff about gas in Gaza and the Ben Gurion pipeline and all of that. And then there's this other sort of strand, which is the anti-colonial struggle, and it's very much an anti-colonial struggle. And when you read Orientalism and you understand how people of the South or people of color or non-Westerners, whatever, are characterized in literature, and then you can see that's what's going on here. When they call Gazans human animals, and you can see that you've got the big problem is you've got a whole society now in Israel, a youth in Israel who have been raised on this propaganda and this indoctrinated stuff. If you go into, Israelis know all about this, and everything is there in Hebrew, especially about the religious Zionism. And there's a lot of challenges to it going on in Israel by Israelis, a lot more than is in the West. The media in Israel is a lot more honest, and it's really interesting to get into it. I would suggest to your viewers to look into it, because you'll see that there's a lot of differences of opinion.
Well, there is also a fairly open media. I mean, Haaretz, for instance, as a newspaper, is worth reading because it's quite honest.
Yeah, but then when we see these TikToks coming out mocking Gazans' death, and people are like, "How is that possible?" It's possible because people are indoctrinated. That's how it's possible, and they need to clear their minds. And it's not just in Israel they're indoctrinated; here as well. I read a thing about some girl from Hendon, from where I grew up. She's gone to fight in the IDF. What are you doing? Like, how is that possible that you can think that that's the right thing to do? And imagine if it was a Muslim. I mean, compare it to Shamima Begum, right? So there's this huge double standard, and that does link into colonialism and racism and oppression. So there's a lot to unpack.
I mean, Shamima Begum was involved with was an illegal terrorist group, recognized as such in this country, Islamic State. But Mohammed, just wait a minute. We're going to just watch. I'll come back to you. We're going to watch this report from the Israeli Defense Force saying that they are expanding ground operations throughout the Gaza Strip.
תקפנו היום במטוסי קרב בכל רצועת עזה, תקיפות משמעותיות מאוד, מדויקות ומבוססות מודיעין. בנוסף אנחנו מרחיבים את הפעולה הקרקעית מול מרכזי הכובד של חמאס בכל מקום ברצועת עזה. להדגיש את זה, כוחותינו במובן הזה נחושים להרוג את המחבלים, לנצח בכל קרב ולהמשיך לעשות את זה בכל מקום שידרש, בסג'איה, ג'באליה ובכל מרכז כובד שבו ניתקל באויב. בצפון מטוסי קרב וכלי טייס מאוישים מרחוק תקפו היום מפקדה מבצעית, תשתיות טרור ומבנים צבאיים של חיזבאללה בשטח לבנון. כוחות צה"ל תקפו בארטילריה את המקורות מהם בוצעו שיגורים לשטח ישראל. אנחנו נמצא בתוך המלחמה את השלב הנכון שבו אנחנו יכולים להתחיל לאסוף את הנתונים ולהתחיל ולתחקר את עצמנו בשלבים של המלחמה. לא נדחה את הכל לסוף המלחמה. אנחנו ממשיכים לדרוש מארגונים בינלאומיים בעולם לוודא את שלומם של החטופים שלנו ולסייע בתרופות ובמענה רפואי נדרש. זאת דרישה.
We're going back to, that was the Israeli Defense spokesman Daniel Hagani saying they're expanding their operations. We're going back to our guest, Mohammed Daniel. Mohammed, welcome back. How was your conversion to Islam greeted by friends and acquaintances in the Jewish community in London?
Shock, I guess, at first. And then after a while, I mean, it was the late 90s, so it was before September 11. So it was kind of different. It wasn't quite as difficult, I guess, in some ways. But yeah, some quite a lot of hostility from certain people. But my immediate family, alhamdulillah, they were much more open to what I wanted, and it was very much a thing of, well, if it works for you and it makes you happy, which it clearly did, then okay, we accept it. Zionism was a sticking point, and we had a lot of discussions about that. But I would say that none of my immediate family are Zionist anymore. They haven't become Muslim, but inshallah, one day.
And when you go, when you see the protests or attend the protests, I don't know if you do, over what's happening in Gaza. I mean, big Jewish bloc now on those protests, large numbers of Jews speaking out against this. Does that warm your heart?
Very much, yeah, very much. And I've had some great talks with many of them, and my mum is one. My mum used to take me on protest CND marches when I was a kid, so she's very much an activist. And my dad grew up in South Africa and left because of apartheid, protesting against apartheid. So he's got a very strong sense of justice, which he always taught me. So I'm very much a product of that. So I think it is good, and I think there's a big change happening now across the world, and a lot of people. I think it's like, either you think that what's going on is absolutely awful, or you try and gloss over it. It's like one or the other, right? At the moment, there's not much in between. Like, how can you justify killing children? Like that Israeli spokesman saying, we want the international humanitarian support for our hostages. And in the same breath, talking about bombing and expanding bombing and killing children. And they know they're killing children. It's not like an accident, right? So that double standard is apparent for everybody. So it's just, are you going to see that and be against that, or are you going to somehow try and justify that? And alhamdulillah, most people, I think, are seeing, a lot of people anyway, are seeing the truth at the moment.
I mean, that is a very powerful, powerful statement. I mean, there's a huge disconnect, as you must be aware of, between the positions taken by the people who run this country, the people who govern this country, and indeed the main opposition parties, and popular opinion, which is 76% in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I've not, since Jeremy Corbyn went, I've not really seen anybody in mainstream politics who I can identify with or who I would vote for. I'll be honest with you. I wish that wasn't the case. But they clearly just care about their own backs. I don't know what Keir Starmer believes in his heart. I would hope that he can see the truth. But then say it, like, and come what may, it's sometimes you have to be brave and say what the truth is, and not worry about your position. I mean, when children are being killed every 10 minutes, isn't that a time when you should stand up and speak the truth? If not then when?
I mean, also in terms of your family history, I mean, you must see some comparison between how the Jews were treated in Britain. I'm talking about Britain, but and anti-Semitism at the beginning of this last century, and Islamophobia today.
Yeah. I mean, when I see what's happening in Gaza, I see my great-grandparents who ran from Poland and Russia from pogroms. Like one half of my father's family was killed in the Holocaust, just obliterated. And I see all those people, and I imagine them seeing what's going on now. Who are they going to identify with? Who are they going to identify with when? How is it possible that people who have been through that, our ancestors have come from that, have been through that, and now they're visiting that on other people? It's shameful. Honestly, it's shameful. And our ancestors would be ashamed. My great-grandparents would be ashamed, and they would be ashamed of me if I didn't speak out against it, because they ran from Poland, from Russia. My grandpa was born in the East End of London. His parents came over from Russia and Poland with nothing, and they did that so that I could have the nice, life that I had or my dad had, and than I had. And now look, people going over there and contributing to that. It's just
Mohammed, I'm sorry I have to break because we have to have a break now. Mohammed Daniel, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after that break for our continued coverage of the war in Palestine and the continuing and growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza.